do the sex.
Today's Locker Room Talk and Shots topic is sex after a breakup. We are talking breakup sex, rebounds, real love, and healing wounds. Dear listener, you have been with me about 3 years. And about a year and a half ago, you went through a breakup with me and then a makeup. And your girl is back in breakup mode. And this time, I'm taking the bull by the horns. I mean, I used to think the best way to get over someone was to get under someone else. But I've grown a little. And now I'm looking for real healing. And I think we all want to know when we're in this really tender, yucky phase of a breakup, like what is the quickest way to get to the other side and back to banging the way we want to? I am not qualified to answer that. However, I do have someone with me who I think can give us lots of the answers we are seeking. My guest today is Dr. Stormy Hill. She is a certified intimacy and relationship coach and the founder of Love Deep Lab. She coaches men, women, and couples to have more power and passion in all areas of their lives. She is also the owner of 2 occupational therapy businesses focusing on mental health and substance abuse disorders. She combines the knowledge from her medical degree, her coaching certifications, her experience as a mental health occupational therapist, and her 15-year practice in breathwork, yoga, and sacred sexuality. So welcome, Dr. Stormy. Can you tell my listeners just a little bit more about you?
Sure. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me. I love this topic. It is, like you mentioned, it's tender, it's amazing, it's challenging, it's all of the things. So I'm super excited to dive into this with you. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. This work is my passion, right? Helping people reclaim their sensuality, reclaim their sexiness, their aliveness, and that's at all phases, whether you're in partnership or just going through a breakup or post-divorce or, happily married, in all the phases. How do we be in reclamation of our power, our sensuality, our sexual energy, all of the things, even no matter where we are in our life transitions and phases. So I do men's, women, and couples coaching in this space around intimacy, communications, relationships. And then, as you mentioned in my bio, I have other businesses that I do occupational therapy, mindfulness, life skills, executive functioning, that sort of coaching in that space.
Well, I'm excited about this conversation. And listener, first of all, I want to remind you, you can go to my YouTube channel at Annette Benedetti, and you can actually watch this interview and see who our guest is. But I also want to remind you that it's important to stay to the end, especially in this conversation, because at the end of this podcast, Dr. Stormy is going to give us, all of us, 10 tips for healing and reclaiming our sensuality after a breakup, after a divorce. I mean, and I am imagining, correct me if I'm wrong, that these tips can be used in all sorts of situations where grief is affecting your ability to be in touch with your sensual self.
Totally. Yeah, well said, right? Grief is its own animal, its own teacher. And it is, anytime there's a breakup, there is a grieving process, but it also could be like the loss of a partner, like the death of a partner, right? Any of those transitional places. These are some really powerful tips to help you to heal.
Yes. So I'm excited about this conversation. I'm having coffee today. What time is it? I am in Portland and it is noon. I am still drinking coffee because that's my life. How about you?
It is 1:00 here. I'm in Costa Rica and I'm drinking a mocktail at the moment that will at 5:00 switch to a cocktail. So
I want to be in Costa Rica mocktailing it up with you. Well,
come on down anytime.
Let's raise our glasses. Let's get ready to talk about sex. Cheers. So I'm just going to dive in with a person has just had a breakup. Because I'm thinking about the day of for me. What is, and I know this is a big question, but what is your advice, like the first thing that person should do?
Yeah, that's a really beautiful question. So I feel I'm holding you tenderly, Annette, that you're, in the acute post breakup moments. Those are very tender moments, but, I think what comes to mind is just like up leveling your self-care, because when in these really tender first few moments, hours, days after a breakup, really, because it can easily, the self-care can drop to the bottom of the to-do list, particularly when we're hurting, right? Because we think of self-care as like a spa day or something. That's great, but it actually means taking care of yourself in all ways, physically, emotionally, spiritually, sexually, all the ways, right? So what can you do that feels good to you to take care of you? And really asking yourself that question probably multiple times throughout the day in those first few days. And instead of letting your self-care drop to the bottom of the to-do list, I really encourage you to like pop it up to the top.
I love that. That is true. I think the last time I went through the breakup with the same person I went through this time, my self-care went, and from things like just bathing every day and wearing something pretty.
Totally.
And there's something empowering about putting extra attention into yourself. In your experience, when you work with people in the post breakup space, what are some of the first things you see happening to a person going through that, especially when it comes to the connection with their own sensuality, sexuality, and so on?
Yeah. So I think there can be, our culture is we're really good at avoiding pain, right? We do it in lots of ways, whether it's substances or, alcohol, drugs, whether it's, social media, overindulging, food, gambling, porn. Like these are all ways that we use to medicate, to not feel the pain. So probably, contrary to, if you read about breakups, a lot of people say stay really busy. And while I do think it's good to stay a certain degree busy, I actually like what I see is people numbing to the pain, right? Because it hurts. Like it's literally called heartbreak for a reason. It is a visceral cellular experience. It is a pretty universal experience for most people, and it doesn't make it suck any less when you're going through it to know that it's universal, right? So the more like I really see like often a shutting down, right? So I'm good, I'm fine, I'm going to stay super busy, I'm going to dive into work, or I'm going to call an old fling or whatever it might be, which I'm sure, like you mentioned, we'll get into rebound sex and breakup sex. But, it's really to seeing that like that contraction in, I don't want to feel this, this hurts. So here's the things I'm going to consciously and unconsciously do to not feel. And that totally just makes you human. Pain is hard, but the more you can lean into the pain, the quicker you will move through it.
Is that true? I mean, you hear that a lot. And certainly in my own experience right now, I've been doing work where like when the pain comes on, I like sit with it and I think about, well, where am I feeling it in my body? What is that? And
Totally.
I allow myself that. And then there comes a time when I'm like, all right, now I need to like set it aside and do something. But
Beautiful.
can you explain why it's important to connect with the pain, and why avoiding and numbing and disassociating from it slows down the process?
Yeah, really great question. So I think, we're not evolved enough to just numb to the hard stuff, pain and heartbreak and suffering and grief. Like so when we numb to those things, which again is understandable, right? Who is like, oh, I love the pain. It's and pain is a powerful teacher, but she can be a bitch too, right? It can be so painful, right? So when we numb to the hard things, we also numb to bliss, joy, our orgasm, pleasure, right? So and that kind of helps to have that cognitive understanding that when we numb to hard things, we are also numbing to like the yumminess and the awesomeness in our life. And so that's sort of what happens. But the reason why I always encourage, right? There's like the cliches, right? Feel to heal, and they're cliches because they're true, right? So you have to move through the emotion, and it really comes back to like a lot of the most recent work in the last, particularly 13 years on trauma, right? So a breakup is a grieving process. It's a deconstruction process. It can be very destabilizing, even if it's a good choice, like if it's a healthy choice for you, that doesn't make it hurt less necessarily. But really when we get stuck in an emotion, that's when it causes us problems, right? Either we swim around in it, right? We percolate in it, or it gets lodged in our body, right? And now we know that trauma literally is stored in our body. And so there may be traumatic aspects to your breakup. There may not be, but that grief, right? We can get stuck in grief. We can get stuck in any of the stages of grieving, actually, we can get stuck in. It's not a linear process to move through. One day you might be in one phase of grieving, and the next day or even 3 hours later in a different phase of grieving. So educating yourself about that, and then knowing that as you let yourself feel, you will, like, the emotions will change. They will shift. Like, that is they are like the weather, right? Emotions come and go, even when you feel like they are stuck, even when you feel like this will never end. I'm going to feel like this forever, right? That isn't true. That's that reactive place. But you also mentioned, Annette, which I love, is that, like, that you can want it to, like, go away, but you also have, and so you said you're practicing where you feel it, but you also can say, okay, I'm going to put it aside for now to do X, Y, or Z. So that's a really beautiful self-nourishing practice, right? I think of it like a faucet. You can, like, dive into the emotion and really feel it, or you can dial back the faucet and be like, I need to put it aside so I can focus on whatever it is I'm doing, right? One of my roles or one of my responsibilities. That's different than sweeping it under the rug or pretending it isn't there. So I really love that thought you had, that introspection you had, that wisdom you had, that you can dial it up and dial it down. You don't have to just stay in it. You can be nourishing and resourcing for yourself to dive in when you really can. Like, when I was going through a breakup, I would give myself times just to, like, stomp, yell, cry, scream, pound a pillow, all these things. And then same thing. I was like, okay, now I need to go to my single mom duties and to my work, my business owner duties. But I knew I had, like, moved it through. And if you look at the animal kingdom, we're one of the only people, like, if you, like, let's say, a gazelle's being chased by a lion or something, right? And even if they are in the fawn or the freeze response, as soon as the threat is gone, they stand up and they shake it off and then they run away, right? So when we don't allow it to move through, that's when it gets stuck. We don't do that, like, figurative shake it off and shake it out, right? And so the more you can let yourself move all the way through whatever emotion it is you're feeling, anger, blame, resentment, shame, sadness, grief, all the things that are common in a breakup, the quicker you will move into different states of feeling and being.
Speaking of moving through, so I am over on TikTok and have been, I posted one video about breaking up and the algorithm did its thing. And suddenly I'm inundated with everybody's breakup stories. And one thing I've noticed is the first thing people who are in newly broken up situations do is usually go to the stage of, like, how do I get them back? And usually it's in this, this person has not been good to them, and they're just like, well, maybe if I did this, then they would have loved me more. Maybe if I had done that, maybe they would treat me. So how do I get them back and then change myself to be whatever they need to love me the way I want them to, which I think it's so heartbreaking. This is not my personal situation, but I do know it's a common place for people to go to post-breakup mode. What are your thoughts on that? What's your advice for people who find themselves, like, even if they chose to leave the relationship because they knew it wasn't good for them, and then suddenly they're like, I need that back?
Right. And that's a really great question. Like, it's interesting. So if I look at my own breakup histories, there's been more than one in my life. I have tattoos, like, that almost always represent something I learned in my post breakup. My mother literally calls them my post breakup tattoos. So they tell a story for sure. But you mentioned, like, you might even be the one to have chosen or led on the leading, on the shifting of the closing of that relationship, and you still might find yourself some degree of days later or even months later to be like, I think I want them back, or did I make the right choice, or did I make a mistake, right? That's totally normal. And your question about why we do that, I think is really multifactorial. One is that a relationship becomes a pattern and some degree of a habit, good, bad, ugly, fabulous, and everything in between. It becomes familiar, and our brain loves to label familiar as safe, as good. It's literally like it's a survival tactic wired in our biology. So know that like in your breakup, it's likely going to be uncomfortable because it's unfamiliar. But the more you can tell yourself that unfamiliar does not mean bad, it simply just means unfamiliar, like to your brain, to your nervous system, the more you'll be able to just hang in there in the unfamiliar, the uncomfortable, right? It can be like, oh, I'm really missing this person. Well, yeah, they had a huge role in your life for however long they did. And now there's a void there, a space there. And so we can want to fill the space with what we know, even if what we know isn't great for us. Right. So that's that kind of understanding can be helpful, not when you're in a triggered moment, but when you're in a calm moment of processing the grief and the breakup, to know that that is going to happen. That's literally like neurologically wired in us. And the brain, is amazing and intelligent and fabulous it is also very basic in some ways. And that is one of the ways, right? Unfamiliar. I'm scanning for danger. I'd like to get out of the feeling of unfamiliarity into comfort, into familiar. So, knowing that can be helpful on a cognitive perspective. And then I think if you start having those thoughts of, what could I have done differently? What could I have done differently to have had this person love me in the way I deserve and want to be loved is actually a lovely question, a helpful question. But what could I have done differently to get them back or to make them stay is less helpful, because you're externalizing the journey. You're externalizing the work, if that makes any sense. You're saying, what could I have done so that they would have done something different? So they would have stayed, or they would have chosen me, or whatever your story is, painful story. Instead, I just recommend a shift of, again, knowing that there can literally be like a cellular habituation, a cellular addiction that happens in relationships. And I was in an abusive relationship, which I share really openly about. And I'm a therapist. Like, I should have known better, right? So I had so much shame to work through. But there was literally a cellular addiction, like the volatility, the passion, the fabulous sex, all that was included in that relationship was a hook for me on literally like a neurotransmitter level. Until I had the wisdom and the space and the clarity to say that is unhealthy. That's not what I choose any longer. And so, I think the more you can, and it sounds kind of nerdy and esoteric, but the more we understand how habits, how patterns, how our brains work, the more helpful we are to ourselves when we're hurting. And so that's kind of like the nerdy thing about it. And then I think another good reframe is, what could I have done so that they stay would actually be, would I, in a grounded, calm moment, would I choose this person again? And if the answer is yes, then it's, what would I choose? So what about that person specifically would I choose again? Maybe they were really kind. Maybe they were really loving. Maybe they were honest. Okay. Followed by, what would I not choose again in a next potential partner, right? So that we tend to put on saint status people in our past, even when they have been not good to us, right? It's just something we do. So we tend to idealize our past relationships. So make sure when you're noticing about what you would choose, what you enjoy, what you value about that person, that you also follow it with, what would you not choose to repeat again?
Yeah, I always call it the highlight reel. In the movie where they do this highlight reel, you start to do that post breakup where it's like you put all of the,
Totally.
pretty pictures. But I'm like, maybe a good exercise is to do a low light reel. And you might find the low light reel is actually a little bit longer than the highlight reel. But it is funny how our brains do that suddenly. Like, they're pulling up these beautiful moments. And I, with myself, did an exercise like, oh, here's the picture, but what's the story that was going on underneath that picture? What was the stuff that was really happening in that moment? And suddenly it helps dissolve this, making it a saint situation. So 2 questions out of that. First of all, I think something that would be useful is when someone is in a triggered moment after a breakup. Let's say you wake up, you had a dream about your ex, and you wake up and you are just in that up here triggered, feeling awful, missing them, wanting them back moment. What would you tell that person to do in that moment?
Yeah. So, I mean, just the fact that you said triggered, right? So you may not even notice that you're triggered, right? Sometimes in hindsight, we can see our trigger states more easily. But I had a teacher who once shared with me, like, Stormy, if you ever feel urgent, an urgency to do, act, say, not do, whatever, an urgency. When we know that feeling, it's like, I need to do it now, right? It's that is your ego, right? Like and not the like good ego, like that is your ego, that anything coming from your wise self, your grounded self, is not going to feel an urgency. And I have used that as a guide for myself, that I do it in my parenting and my partnership. I do it as a boss. Like I really try not to act, do, or say when I am feeling an urgency, because I'm not in a grounded state. I'm not in my best self. My nervous system is upregulated. And nobody was like, I made the best decision when I was super pissed off or when I was super triggered, right? Like, nobody does, because we're literally not in the thinking part of our brain. So, but what can you do is literally pause. Notice that you're feeling triggered. You're feeling anxious. Notice what that feels like in your body. Maybe you're feel wound up like a jack in the box, or feeling like you have to do this right now, right? Like there's these signs and symptoms in our body that we are not in a grounded state. Like literally notice that and have grace with yourself. Like don't beat up on yourself, because that's certainly understandable. And have compassion with yourself. Take a few slow, deep breaths, literally like in for 3 through your nose, out for 6 through your nose, stimulates your vagus nerves, helps you get out of sympathetic nervous system into parasympathetic, where you are going to be more grounded. It's literally like 3 breaths, in for 3, out for 6, in and out through your nose. This is from like polyvagal theory stuff, ways to stimulate our parasympathetic nervous system. And just take a few deep breaths. Like you don't have to act right then, right? And so when our breath is one of the quickest. Yes, exactly.
Don't
sit on your hands.
Text him.
I can literally tell you with my own journey, particularly with that one abusive relationship, the only abusive relationship that I've been in, I had to literally put my phone out of my reach at the first few days. Like if I had a desire to, I would literally sit on my hands. Like actually, I was like, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. Because it would not have served me. It would not have been a wise choice. And have I made choices that are not wise? Of course. But I would like to help our listeners make as few of those as possible, right? And so, yeah, don't text him or her. Like, don't, sit on your hands, put your phone out of reach, have your breakfast, take some breaths, do some movement. All of these things from a sensory perspective. So outside, your sensations, help you to ground, and then move. Make a choice, make a decision when you're grounded.
That is great. Great advice. I don't know how many times in my past, I definitely am wise to this one when I am in a moment and I'm like, I'm going to do this thing or say this thing, and I'm like really worked up. I've learned to put it off for a day and then revisit it. Totally. I always am like, give yourself 24 hours.
Absolutely. Or even write the email and save it as a draft, like, or whatever it is good, or the text, because same thing. I've done so many where I've written what I wanted to say, and then like the next day I've been like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I didn't send that, So yeah, do a brain dump. That's a great tip. And that, like, write it down somewhere where you are not going to send it. They're not going to see it, but get it out is totally a great exercise. And then don't act until you're grounded, until you're calm, right? And so a lot of people recommend no contact after a breakup. I am not so prescriptive. I don't like good or bad or wrong or right. I like what serves you. So a great question is to ask yourself what serves you in this stage that you are in of this healing process. Maybe it is no contact, right? Maybe it's some contact, or if you have kids together, like I had to communicate with my ex-husband around my child, and that was it. That was my agreement. That was my boundary around our child only. So, but really what serves you? And I'm a codependent in recovery. And so, so I always ask myself, what serves me? That is like sacred selfishness. What serves you in this moment? And then be thoughtful about that.
Yeah, I think, being selfish is something that can be hard for, people who are going through breakups, really not considering like what's best for this other person who I have been with and loved, and depending on who you were in the relationship, been the caregiver for emotionally. Especially women, we tend to do most of the emotional labor in a relationship. So when we leave a relationship, it's still our go-to to be like, how would they feel if I did this thing? How would they react, or how would this make them feel? And learning how to just be like, this is about what I need and what I feel, and what they feel or need anymore is not my problem, you know?
And that really is what I call sacred selfishness. One of my tattoos says sacred selfishness for this reason, because it was a big learning process in my own life. But it really is, right? It's not selfish. It's sacred care. It's sacred. So I used to call it sacred selfishness. But also what you just mentioned about where they are, what they're doing, what they're feeling, how they're acting is not your responsibility, nor is it your business, right? At this point. But also, like, believe it. It can be about believing in them. They're an autonomous individual. They will be okay, and so will you, even if it doesn't feel that way. So, right, trusting in their power just as much as you're trusting in your own allows it to kind of get some sovereignty, some space. That kind of just brought up for me, like, when there is a space, because a person who was very close in your life is no longer there. So there is a physical, logistical, emotional, maybe financial, spiritual, intellectual space that is created. A great question, not in a triggered moment, but in a calm moment, is, how do I want to fill this space? How do I want to fill this space? Because a space is just a space, right? It's just a container. How do I want to fill this space? So maybe the logistical space, like in your bed, for example, I literally put one of those like long things because it just felt so good to like snuggle up to something that wasn't my, broken up partner. And so, that's a logistical thing for when it comes to who you're going to spend time with. Be thoughtful. How do I want to fill this space, right? And people fill it, right, with breakup sex, with rebound sex. I mean, we do that. I've done it. Many of us have done it. And that's, again, what comes down to that underlying, again, not about good or bad or wrong or right, because so long as it's safe and consensual, like, that's all I care about when it comes to sex. But again, the question is, does this serve you in your healing?
Yeah, I guess that was kind of my follow-up question, because you had mentioned, like, yeah, now that you've gone through a breakup, there is this void in various areas of your life. And obviously, something that people commonly do, especially with the intimate, part of that, because I mean, maybe I'm wrong in this, but I do think one of the most painful voids is sort of that intimacy space, because intimacy really requires vulnerability, and it's a very vulnerable thing. And so this is where I kind of want to move into some of the most common space fillers we turn to when it comes to intimacy, which is breakup sex, and even in my research, because before I come up with the questions for this podcast, I'm looking at what are people researching. Like, when they're in breakup mode, they're Googling shit left and right, like to figure out, get the answers, right? And so one of the top questions is breakup sex okay? Should I go back and have breakup sex? And I'm like, no, but I'm curious. I'm curious about what your take on that is.
Yeah, it's very common, as you just mentioned. I mean, so we'll talk about breakup sex and rebound sex a little bit differently, but and I get it. Like, just, I always come back to the science, because I'm a scientist, but also science doesn't lie, right? Like, our minds play tricks, but the science, like you said, the research, what are they researching? What does the research say? But so, again, because I'm not good. Yes, it's good. No, it's not good. It's really like the underlying question for both rebound sex and breakup sex, right? So breakup sex being with the person you just broke up with, rebound sex with someone else. Okay. But like, to fill the void, right? So breakup sex, you're going to get a dopamine hit, an oxytocin hit, right? Orgasms feel good, right? Like, all of these things that make sense. Of course you're wanting that. And if you are wanting to be in reconnection with that person, you just got what you are wanting, right? But then what's the aftermath of that? And this is don't shame yourself. Don't punish yourself if you've done that. Like, just learn from it. Did it serve you in your healing? Okay, so let's say you're at like a certain stage in your healing and you have breakup sex. And despite the, like, maybe it was fabulous sex, maybe it was average sex, whatever, it was sex. do you feel like that moved you further in your healing process, or did it set you back a few steps, right? And again, this isn't even considering the other person, because that's all sorts of convoluted. But for you, does it serve you, or is it a band-aid to keep you from feeling? And that's really the question that I encourage my clients and myself, and when I'm in breakup mode, to ask myself, right? To ask yourself. And give yourself some grace and understanding if you did do it. And maybe you're choosing not to do it again, or maybe it is like, yeah, actually, you know what, that works for me for right now. And so long as you're communicating clearly and it's consensual and, you know, all those things, then for me, it's not a good or a bad. But often breakup sex is more about our wanting to not feel and wanting a moment of respite, a moment of reconnection to ease the pain, than it is about furthering our healing.
Yeah. I'm going to be a solid no. I think people should not have break. I'm not a doctor. I can be like judgmental. No, not that you're a bad person if you do it.
I mean, I can share with you, for me, it's an absolute, me personally, it's an absolute no. I've done it multiple times, sometimes multiple times with the same breakup person. You know, and here's the thing, it has an energy that can be like hot, right? Because you're like, shouldn't be doing it. You probably both know you shouldn't be doing it, right? So you have to know that. Like, so for me, a lot similar to you, it's a no. It doesn't move me forward in my healing. I'm currently with a partner, and he knows. I'm like, if we break up, we're never having breakup sex. And he's like, well, you say never, and I say never. And I said, no, I know never, because for me, that wouldn't be furthering my healing. I'm at a point now for me that choice is no. And I'm really clear about it, even with my current partner, you know. So I think you have to get curious for yourself, you know. And similar with rebound sex is like, you know, I had a partner that I was with, and he was like, well, you know, was having sex like a week or two after, and I was like, oh, okay, well, that's a band-aid for him. And I chose to actually be consciously celibate in this breakup for 6 months, because I knew I didn't want to choose that, but I did choose that because I knew it would serve me best, right? So it was interesting to see us going such different directions, with him out sleeping with other people and me choosing celibacy, right? Whose path was better? I don't know. I'm not in the place to judge. But for me, that path was great for me, to literally choose conscious celibacy for the first time in my life. I'd been celibate other moments, but not by conscious choice. But again, so I chose that rebound sex for me wasn't a place that I was open to, because I knew my patterns needed to change. And I knew that they were less likely to change when I'm in partnership and all the feel goods with someone new.
I know that we almost have to talk about them separately, because breakup sex is so very different than, and the effects is so very different than rebound sex. Now, breakup sex is with the same person. Can doing these two things be actually detrimental to someone's not only healing, but just mental health and emotional health?
Absolutely, right? I mean, so if you're talking about breakup sex, it could make you think that, let's say you weren't the one leading on the breakup, and that person comes to you for breakup sex, and you are open to it, or you think you're open to it, or you acquiesce, or whatever. And then you are hopeful about the reunification. Like, that doesn't keep you moving along in your healing, right? And you can never assume to know where that other person is or what was behind their decision for breakup sex, right? So again, taking back that power, that time, does it serve you and your healing? And so, yeah, I think it can also become a pattern, right? Breakup sex itself can become a pattern. So noticing how you feel before, during, and after breakup sex is a good gauge for yourself, right? Because before you might be like, oh, I'm excited, or whatever, you know, even maybe during, if the sex is great. And then after, perhaps, and this is what happened for me personally, I was like, oh, yuck. That was not a good choice for me, right? So lesson learned, right? And then change, you know, and one thing I say this so tenderly, because breakup is such a tender time for us when we're in it, and tender hearts are beautiful hearts, but they're tender nonetheless, but is that you are the one common denominator in all of your relationships, the failed ones, the successful ones. And I say that with so much compassion, because hopefully that feels liberating, because you can change yourself. You can work on yourself, grow yourself. Hopefully we are evolving to our final breath, you know, in change and in growth. but you can't be responsible and aren't responsible for your partner or their growth or their change. But that, for me, when I heard that, it was a therapist who said that to me. Stormy, you're the one common denominator in all these relationships. And at first I was like, what? That's a horrible thing to say. And then I was like, actually, I feel so much freedom from that, because that's when I really was able to dive in and say, what do I want? What will I not accept or tolerate? And what do I want to create in a relationship?
That resonates. And in fact, I had made a little video over on TikTok about it because it was this kind of revelation I had. And it was the first time I started to get excited, because what I noticed in this relationship and then reflecting on my past relationships was like a similarity, a cycle. Mm-hmm. And what I realized is, and it's not about, I didn't feel shameful, but what I asked myself is, what is unhealed in me? What is the wound in me that continues to allow people to come into my life and access all of the benefits of getting to be with me? Because there are a lot. And to get that and yet not give me what I need. And if there is something I can heal, if there's something I can do to heal whatever in me is allowing that to happen, that means I'll get to this place where I'm only allowing people in my life who are going to bring to the table like that equal energy, that equal give and take. And how exciting is that? How exciting is it that I am the common denominator and that I can tend to the wound or whatever it is that needs tending to, and then receive the kind of love and relationship I want. It made me feel like I could do something, like I was in control, right?
Beautiful. I love that reflection. And that's so well said, right? It's so we have these unhealed parts of ourselves. So we call, in my work world, we call it them shadow parts. So shadow work, right? But parts of ourselves that, and you will likely notice, like, not in the acute phases, not when you're really hurting, but do an inventory of like looking back at your relationships. Like you mentioned, you were able to see some patterns, right? Because those patterns will guide you in the places to your blind spots, right? So to your what you just said, like, why do I keep allowing in this when I'm giving myself fully, right? So you will notice patterns in your relationships. You will, and that you really can get better clarity on in retrospect, right? When you're looking back, right? And those patterns point you in the direction of your growth, right? So maybe it's an unhealed wound, I don't know, from childhood, or maybe it's an unhealed relational in your first primary relationship, right? There's lots of different reasons, and none of which matter. That it's a really beautiful unfolding to say, what are these patterns in myself that are bringing in this sort of person, and what do I want moving forward, right? Like, what will I not tolerate moving forward? Because what you want is really important, but also what you won't tolerate is really important. And that's a really tender time in our breakup phases, in our healing phases, to reflect upon that.
Yeah, it's empowering to get that
it is
information and feel like you can act on it. So now moving into the actual sex realm, I think that people going through or who have just been through a breakup, one of two things seems to happen, and you maybe know more things that happen, but one is you just don't feel sexy anymore. You don't feel like you there was a whole movie made about someone getting their groove back, like a lot of times, and I can only speak from a woman's point of view. I'm sure this happens to people of all genders, but where you feel like you've lost your mojo, your groove. Mm-hmm. That could be because sometimes in the relationship, your sensuality and sexuality, because of all of the stuff going on in the relationship that's not working, kind of kills your sexual power. But then I think just post breakup, it's common to feel not sexy, not someone who is going to be desired. The other thing that happens is being hypersexual and just being like, I'm going to go out and bang everything that moves. Like, fuck this. I was in this relationship. I was treated like shit. And I was given this person the good loving. They took it for granted. And now I'm going to go and do the thing.
Right.
So I want to speak to that a little bit. And for maybe starting with you feel nothing between the legs, like suddenly you feel like dead to your sensuality. What is your advice for someone going through that?
Yeah. So really is a really tender question, right? So you mentioned that you just might not feel sexy, right? Like you mentioned earlier, like I just want to stay in my sweatpants all day long and I want to, or I'm going to eat to feel better and, whatever, stress eat, grief eat, whatever it might be. So the sexiness, we'll address that separately than sex, is really, it's really common for that to happen. And it's really because we tend to outsource our sexy, right? Our sexy, that's the result of outsourcing our sexy, because and by the way, this is very common. I used to do this myself, is that our sexiness is based on the reflections of our partner, our interactions with our partner, our sex with our partner. We might be dressing up for our partner. We might be putting on makeup for our partner, right? And I had the privilege of lecturing to a women's group, speaking at a women's group over the summer about not outsourcing your sexy. And so I started doing all this research into like the science, the research of sexy. And I was so irritated because I had to go pages into NIH research to find the research itself not outsourcing, right? So when people were being researched, they would say, well, my partner finds this sexy, or men report finding this sexy, women report finding this sexy. And it was so frustrating. I had to go pages into the research to find self-reporting of what feels sexy. So again, just have compassion for yourself. Know that you are likely outsourcing a lot of your sexy to the relationship, and it's a time for reclamation. You are a sexy, amazing, powerful, sex-driven person, right? We all are. We all literally came from sexual energy. It's an invitation to reclaim it. So, and it might be so small. It might be like, what makes me feel sexy right now? Like, how do I want to dress? What do I want to drink or eat that would be like, yummy? Yes. What kind of music do I want to listen to? Maybe there's a show you want to watch. Do I want to read some erotic poetry? Like, what makes you feel sexy? Right in the midst of all your pain, right in the midst of your anger, your blame, your shame, all these things that are very common in breakup processing. So not waiting to feel sexy until you're in the next relationship, or not waiting to feel sexy for when you feel better. So one that you can ask yourself that would make me feel sexy right now, right? So like before this podcast, I was like in like a moo kind of thing, super, and then I was like, I feel sexy if I put on my silk dress and some earrings, right, and some pink lipstick. I'm not doing that for anyone else except for I feel sexier, right? So that reclamation, sexy is an inside job. And it really is.
Sexy is an inside job. I love that. Sexy is an inside job. Oh, I need to write that. I'm gonna put it up on my wall. I love that.
Yeah. Give yourself permission to explore, because sexy might be, it would feel sexy is I'm going to make a cup of tea, get in my pajamas and my Uggs and like lay on the couch and read a book. That might feel sexy to you, right? So just giving yourself time to, and again, it's so common to outsource our sexy, but like give yourself time to reclaim that can be a really lovely way to start, to start in your healing, to start not outsourcing that, right? To start taking reclamation of your sexiness. So that's kind of the sexy part. And then you mentioned about like, sex, or, you might go out and be sleeping around, and that might be a choice. Again, does it serve you? Okay. If it serves you, okay. If it doesn't, okay. But, and this is what kind of jumping into one of my tips, but I want to invite you to have an amazing self-pleasure practice, to like learn to make love to yourself. I tell my clients, I want you having fabulous sex, whether you are having it with a partner or not, it makes no difference. And that mindset shift, and certainly for me, when I became a sex and intimacy coach, I was working with in a certification and then also with a coach myself. And I was like, wait, what? You want me to make love to myself? And now I get to teach it, right? Because there's a difference then from getting yourself off, which is fine, and making love to yourself. So if you mentioned, Annette, like the numbness between the legs, like just know that that's part of your pain response. It's a mechanism to protect you. And there's such beautiful ways to start to unwind, to start to de-armor, to start to break down those guards, and a loving, nourishing self-pleasure practice is a super powerful way to do that.
So I need to do a whole podcast on how to make love to yourself. And also this term you use, listener, I don't know if we've used it on this podcast before. I think it may have been mentioned once in the past, de-armoring. Now, this is a whole podcast in itself, but can you really quickly explain what de-armoring is?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's lots of different de-armoring practices, right? Like we armor up when we are hurting, when we're scared, when we're sad, when we're stressed, right? We armor up to protect ourselves, right? It could be family of origin. It could be, again, relational history. It could be media. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why we armor up. We don't just armor up our hearts. We armor up our genitals, right? We armor up our pleasure. We armor up, and not just genitals. Like we might armor up our breasts, right? It's a shutting down by walling out. Okay. And so a lot of clients I work with, they'll say, well, I don't feel anything. Right. So then we get to get curious. Is it that you're not feeling it because you're up in your head, or when you're in your body, have you really developed numbness, right? In a sensorial way. So, and I work in my other world with a lot of trauma, high levels of trauma, and it's a very common trauma response to numb, psychologically, physiologically, emotionally, to numb. Okay, it's a protective mechanism. It's not but it may no longer serve you where you are in your current healing journey. It likely did serve you at one point, but it may no longer serve you. So there's just beautiful ways to and so one really easy way to start to de-armor and start to feel is I love Eugene Genlin's work, the felt sense practice, where you just literally, I mean, this is a great practice to do, even no matter where you are in your healing state. Set a timer on your phone for 2 minutes and close your eyes if that feels safe. If not, just soften your gaze and just stay with sensation. So if I were doing it right now, I'd be like, oh, I feel my left, in my mind, I'd say I feel my left foot on the ground. It's actually colder than my right foot. I feel my right booty cheek on the couch more because of the angle I'm sitting at. I can feel the air blowing on my face, right? So I stay with sensation. And what's amazing with this practice, 2 minutes, set a timer, is you'll see how quickly you go into thought, right? I don't like the feeling in my foot, or I'm thinking about my to-do list or whatever. It gives you a chance to come back to sensation. And as we build our connection with our body and our connection with sensation, we allow more pleasure in our lives. And we start to be able to feel in our bodies more, right? And we say feeling, think of it. We say, how are you feeling? People are like, oh, I'm having a good day. It's like, that's not feeling, that's thinking, right? We tend to get up into our heads way more than into our bodies. And this is a really just beautiful practice that's really nourishing and self-resourcing to kind of start to give yourself permission to feel in a really safe way.
I love that. Yeah. I think it's very common for people to be completely out of touch with the sensations in their body and that their body is going through in any given moment, and even and especially during sex. And if you are in a post-breakup or a grief situation and trying to have sex, and your body is, processing this mental and emotional anguish as I've got to protect you because you're in pain, and it's shutting down. I know for myself, my pussy, my vagina, especially my vaginal G spot, it just there is no sensation. I will only experience pressure. And that's because my brain, my body is doing what it's supposed to do, which is protecting me and saying, oh, you're in this really scary space, and I'm going to make sure you don't feel any more pain. You're topped off. You don't need any more pain.
Exactly. And stress and pain are pleasure busters, right? It's really, again, we're not evolved enough to feel both at the same time, right? So these little ways. So and I loved your really vulnerable sharing that there, and I can really relate to that. I've been in that phase myself. So then don't go right for our genitals, right? That's just more trauma, right? We don't want to that. If you're feeling numb, this pleasure practice isn't just about our genitals. We have fingers, we have lips, we have tongues, we have toys, we have breasts, right? We have all these other places where we can feel pleasure, and yet we tend to be very genital focused. So one of the things when I'm teaching about self-pleasure is skip the genitals altogether if you want. You can still have a fabulous self-pleasure practice. So what feels good to you? It might be to turn the water up really warm in the shower and wash your body really lovingly as you would want a lover to do it, for example. Okay, but you're doing it because you are your own best lover. You are your own beloved, maybe with like a yummy soap or a yummy scrub, right? These are other ways that are really loving on yourself that aren't about going right for your genitals, because if there's numbness in your genitals, that's information for you. It's not bad. You're not broken. There's nothing wrong with you. It's information for you. So how do you start to, in a really safe, nourishing, resourcing way, bring back pleasure and sensation into your life? And I would say, don't start with the genitals then. Like, listen to that information, but know you are not broken. Know that your vagina, your yoni, all of it is amazing. It is literally filled with pleasure. Okay. It is like a temple, in my opinion. And know where you are. So start with other parts of your body. Start with noticing joy and pleasure in other areas of your life. Like this yummy drink I'm sipping is like, yum, right? When I notice, I'm like, that is pleasurable, right? So you start to build your confidence in your own body, your trust in your own body, and you start to bring pleasure back into your lives in small doses, in safe ways, and your yoni will open, it will become turned on again. Okay. You are not broken.
I love that. And that kind of ties beautifully into the not outsourcing pleasure and sexiness. I was thinking, and I think that this happens a lot, especially if with your ex, you had, a good sexual chemistry or meaningful sex, or that was a really wonderful part of your relationship. When you leave the relationship, you can often think, well, like, I'm never going to experience that pleasure again. I'm never going to have that connection again. And prior to this breakup for me, I think I had that concern because we had gotten together for sex and it turned into a relationship. And my girlfriend asked me recently, she said, Annette, in the past, you said, because during this relationship, I went through my own self-discovery and woke up my G-spot. I had never felt it before. I found it in the last 2 years, and my A-spot. And I think it created all of this fear that it was this magic penis in my life that had made that happen. And she said to me, do you still feel like it was the penis in your life that woke that up? Are you still in that fear place? And I said, actually, I've been thinking about that. And what I realized is that the magic wasn't in the penis. It wasn't in the cock. The magic is in me. I spent, a year, I did a 365 days of orgasms challenge, not this year, but last year, where I masturbated and gave myself an orgasm every day. And I'm like, I think that is a revelation I've had, that the magic really was me. I projected it onto someone else, right? Yeah. And it's so interesting how quickly I was to give that away to somebody else.
Totally. I just got goosebumps for you. Yes. Yeah. Right. I mean, and really the penis was a gift. It was a catalyst for you to find out about your own body, your own pleasure. Right. So I love that you're like, I was giving that away. And it's interesting. I was working the client talking about, anyway, sometimes what we do is we outsource it, but we also like think of it as that person, or that they were the reason. It's like, and sometimes someone or something is just a catalyst, right? It's just a catalyst for our own growth, showing us what we are capable of and what is possible.
Or what if it was just the right dick in the right place at the right time? I mean, not to be harsh, but I'm saying I did the work. I masturbated through 2 rounds of COVID, a breakup. I mean, I put a stomach flu. Do you know what that's like? That's hard. I'm like, maybe it wasn't the dick. Maybe it was all me. I'm just saying.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. And what a reclamation, right? What a powerful reclamation for you. That's amazing.
But now I do want to now move on to your 10 tips. I think it's that time. This is the time. If you have stuck with us to now, you're getting the goods on 10 tips to post breakup reclaim your sensuality, and that's what we're all here for. I'm here for that. I'm excited about this, so I'm going to let you take over this portion of the conversation.
Okay. So number 1, we actually started off the podcast with it, but up your self-care. Move it to the top of your list. Okay. So up your self-care in this tender time. And if you notice it slipping down the list, pop it back up, right? It is really a time for you to gift yourself to gift yourself your own care. Okay, and I said that you are your own beloved, but that we tend to say, "Oh, this is how I'd want to love her to do it." So we'll do it, right? Do it for yourself. So really upping your self-care. That's number one. Number two, learn to make love to yourself. So we already talked about that. And again, you don't have to go right for genitals. You certainly don't have to go in with penetration, right? Learn to make love to yourself. How do you want to touch yourself? How would you want to be touched, right? But you're doing it for yourself. What other parts of your body? There are so many erogenous zones that we're so genital and maybe breast focused in our culture. So this is your chance to explore, right? So learning to make love to yourself. The third one is surround yourself with people who feel good to you. Okay. Because of that void, that space that we were talking about, we are going to likely fill the space and the void. So fill it thoughtfully with people who celebrate you, people who support you, people who see you, also people that you can be a snotty fucking mess around if you want to be, right? We have a thing in our culture, and it drives me nuts. We hand people tissues. I used to do that, by the way, because I was people pleaser, hand people tissues when they're crying. It gives a message that this is messy, clean this up. I'm not okay with it. So who would let you be a snotty mess and not hand you a tissue? Again, it might be something to think about. The fourth one is to also gift yourself. So yes, gift yourself time with people who celebrate you, who support you, who see you, but also gifting yourself quiet and pause. And this one's a little harder because we can be a little bit afraid of the quiet and the pause. We can feel the void more deeply, the space more deeply, but we have to pause to reflect. We have to pause to self-confront. We have to pause to feel. Okay, so giving yourself quiet and pause. And there's a huge difference for me in my breakup journeys that were really powerful when I learned what it felt like to be alone, and that there's a huge difference between alone and lonely. So if you're in the lonely place right now, okay, but how do you shift it to learning to be alone, learning to be with yourself, okay? And that self-care piece plays into that, but gifting yourself quiet and pause will help you in your healing. Okay? And then the fifth one is a sensuality practice. So we talked a little bit about some sexuality practices, but sensuality, that question, what feels good to me right now? Okay. So, for example, I like to work out a lot. So I might be I'm working out every day because I'm hurting, and I'm going to go to my Peloton, and I'm going to, click it to high intensity. But what feels good to me right now might be some nourishing yoga, might be not to exercise, might be to have a cup of tea, right? Really asking what feels good to me right now. And from a sensorial perspective, right? Noticing, this is another practice, sensuality practice, but noticing the things that feel good in your day. So maybe it's the sunshine on your face, or the air on your face, or the sip of tea, or the lovely glass of wine you have, right? To notice, because you literally start to exercise that pleasure muscle that might feel a bit numb or sluggish or sleepish or turned off right now in your breakup phase. Noticing all the joy and pleasure you do feel and experience in your life. I promise you it is there, okay, in the subtlest ways, in the nuanced ways. But when we notice it, we literally start to train ourselves to see it. We also start to literally exercise that joy and that pleasure ceiling, to raise the pleasure ceiling by exercising those muscles. Okay. And this came to me in my own meditation day. I was like, I like the whole self-love piece, but it can be a little bit at least for me when I was in breakup, I was like, self-love. I don't feel any self-love, right? So I came up with today, self-love. To me, it's where self-love meets adornment, meets pleasure, right? So that's what feels good to you, what feels good to your body. How do you take care of yourself? So where you're loving, where you're pleasuring, right? So bringing those two together is really the sensuality practices. We tend to, I get banned all the time with social media and things because I'm talking about pleasure, and they assume I'm talking about pleasure in the bedroom, but that's one of many types of pleasure. Okay. So being more sensual with yourself, noticing, right? Our brain is literally wrapped in our sensory organs. And so we have this way to kind of help calm our nervous system, help us move through our healing just by what we're seeing, feeling, touching, tasting, experiencing. Okay. And then the sixth one is to get support as needed, right? And that might be a dear friend. That might be a therapist. That might be a coach. That might be a book. Whatever it is, you are not alone. Get support as needed to help you in your journey, right? We don't heal as islands. We heal in community. Just like we don't grow as islands, we grow in community. So get your community, whatever that is, get your support, and know that reaching out for support doesn't make you weak, it makes you powerful. Okay. And then the seventh one is gift yourself space from your ex. Okay. So that might, we already mentioned, that might mean no contact. That might be blocking them on social media, unfollowing them. It might mean saying, I'm a no to breakup sex, right? Whatever that is for you, gift yourself some space. Okay. So because because of those habitual patterns and that neurochemistry, then those dopamine hits and things like that, that can be very confusing. Gifting yourself some space is a really beautiful, powerful thing to do. So, and then the eighth one is that feel to heal. Like, right? Don't shame yourself if you're like, I felt like I was further along and now I'm back in grief. I'm back in pain. I'm back in one of the stages of grieving. I'm back in bargaining, denial, anger, right? There's many stages to grieving. So giving yourself time to feel to heal. The ninth one is focus on you. Okay. That's that common denominator. You are the common denominator. You mentioned this in that earlier, like this was your, like giving yourself, to noticing your patterns, and you felt so powerful. You felt so liberated. You felt like there was possibility, right? So it's a great time to do your work. Okay. I mentioned earlier, and this is a great time, not when you're really triggered, but in a calm moment. For thinking about a future relationship when you're ready, what are your must-haves? And just as importantly, what are your definitely must-have nots? Okay. So I won't tolerate in my relationship this, and I must have this. It's a really lovely time to start to write that down, right? Nobody is perfect, thank goodness. People are much more complicated than that. But what are your absolute hell no's and your absolute must-haves? Okay. That clarity will help you as you move back into the dating, if you choose to, when you choose to. And that's what brings me to the 10th one, which is when you're ready to date, do so consciously, right? It is literally the definition Einstein says of insanity: do the same thing and expect a different result. So do dating differently. Like for myself, I said I had a time of conscious celibacy. Then I had a time of lovers. I was like, I'm only open to lovers. I want to try, that non-monogamy place. And then I was like, okay, now what serves me is a conscious monogamy partnership, right? So I went through different stages because I was in reflection and working with a therapist and a coach of like what served me best. So doing so consciously, dating consciously, it is an adventure of dating. Like there's good, bad, awful, hilarious. I had some like Saturday Night level hilarity when I was first out there dating after my divorce. Literally like could be good Saturday Night Live skits, but I learned from all of them. And all of those missteps and blunders and errors got me to where and who I am today. Certainly far from perfect, but in evolution and feeling more powerful and sexual and alive than I ever have at I'm 47 now. So
I love that. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's so interesting. I feel like kinship there because I'm 49 and I feel more sexually empowered now than I have in my entire life. Yeah. So that's interesting that you just gave about going from monogamy to non-monogamy to monogamy and learning and like not doing the same thing over and over again. And I am very much in that space of like, I define myself as monogamous because I thought that was the only option when I was younger. I've been in a very kind of non-monogamous, monogamish space. And it really like was a learning experience in this last relationship. And it was interesting now to be in this place of like, I'm really going to think about like, what do I want? Like, I don't have to like be married to being non-monogamous or monogamous, but maybe I'm like, here's my standards for monogamy, right? Here's what's a must if you want to be my one and only. And here is, what I can do in non-monogamy and yeah, I'm open to the possibilities with the right partners in the future. And that's also exciting to be able to start looking at what worked, what didn't work, what got unbearable. And then, hey, I can start deciding what that looks like in the future and be in the seat of power and control. I think another thing you said that was really powerful for me was, and so we all talk about thinking about deciding what we'll accept, what we won't accept in a relationship. And we usually rattle off these kind of things. I feel like this is the first time in my life I had a moment where I'm like, there is one thing that's absolutely the thing I've never had, the thing that's always been missing that I know that I absolutely want. And I've had this clarity suddenly, which it's crazy. This is happening at 49, but I'm like, the thing I've never had, and this is my thing, this won't be everybody else's, but security and someone who makes me feel safe. And I'm not just talking about, the alpha, all like protect you physically. That's like, I definitely want someone I know would like, physically protect me, but just feeling secure in a relationship, someone who makes me feel safe to be myself, to be my physical self, and what, because that changes throughout the month,
Totally.
to my emotional self, my spiritual self, like all of those pieces that I know I can be authentically those things with this person, and that they're like, they love that, and they're here, and it's not every day waking up to be like, are you still going to be here if I do this or that? You know what I mean? Right. I want security. Like,
beautiful.
And I had never listed that before. I had never really nailed that one to the wall,
Beautiful. And I love that came through you sharing, like, I've never had that and I know I want it, right? Because we can get in this whole, I've never had it, so how do I really know? And what I always say is, like, just because you haven't had it, A, does not mean you don't deserve it or won't have it. It actually might mean that it's becoming an absolute necessity for you. You won't settle for not having it because you're so committed to having it because you deserve it, right? We all deserve healthy, powerful, passionate, sexy relationships. We all literally do. Pleasure is our birthright, and yet we've become so disconnected from it, often in relationships, and so I love that. Like, so just because you haven't had it, like, don't count that out for yourself. It might be the absolute guiding beacon for what you want to create in relationship.
Yeah. And so I think on that note, to people who are going through a breakup, like, there's pain in breakup and there's grieving, but I think what we never talk about is there can also be really hope and excitement that comes out of it, right?
Absolutely. And it can be both and, right? I teach a lot of mindfulness, and we're very either or, it's either this or it's either that. I used to be very black and white in my thinking in my 20s. And it can be both and. So you can be really hurting and sad and lonely and all of these things, missing, yearning, longing, and hopeful, inspired, excited, right, for what can come. It can be both and. You can have both experiences at the same time.
Yes. Thank you. Well, I think we've covered a lot. I feel good about it. Yeah. I feel like this is going to be helpful for people listening and going through, I hope, a breakup. And I thank you so much for your time and knowledge and kindness through this conversation. I woke up this morning and I was like, oh God, am I going to be able to get through this conversation? Because I woke up a little raw this morning, and this has been lovely and uplifting. I appreciate it.
So glad.
So
I love that you just brought yourself exactly as you are. That's amazing.
I did. I pulled myself together for you. I put some makeup on for you, and it really was for you. No, but I would love for you to take this opportunity to share with my listeners where they can find out more about you, connect with you if they want to, what some of the things are they can do to get in touch.
Yeah, amazing. So I have my website's Love Deeper, Love Deeper, Deeper, Love Deeper Lab, like a laboratory. So lovedeeperlab.com. There's like information. There's actually a complimentary self-care guide that has like meditations and guided journaling prompts that will pop up when you go to the website as a first-time visitor. So you can check that out for sure. Information about my coaching and things is on there. On Instagram, I'm at DocStormy1, so DOC Stormy1. And on TikTok at Touchy Subjects with 3 S's at the end. So Touchy Subjects. And that's probably the easiest way. My email is stormy@lovedeeplab.com if anyone wants to email me. But yeah, it's really just been a pleasure. And I just had a book come out. We hit Amazon bestseller in like 50 categories like a couple weeks ago. So it's on Amazon. It's The Transformational Journey, Stories on Business, Life, and Happiness. And I'm one of 33 authors. I had the privilege of being a celebrity authority on that book. And that's my personal story. So I teach and lecture and speak a lot, but getting to share my personal story was definitely a vulnerability edge for my own growth. And so that's on Amazon if anyone wants to check that out.
That's wonderful. How exciting. Well, thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
And to listeners, until next time, I'll see you in the locker room. Cheers.
Cheers.